Okay, instead of doing two videos on quoting, I'm going to try to condense this into one video so that you've only got one to watch on this. And I think we can pull that off fairly easily. The first thing I want to cover is what you should not be doing with quoting, why you should not use quotes. And regardless of what you've done in the past, or maybe what was acceptable in high school, we do not use quotes to fill space. Even though I know many of us have done this in the past, myself included. If you have a 3, 4, 5 page paper, you don't say, "Oh man, there's no way I'm going to get that much. I'm going to come up with as long a quote as possible. That way, it's going to fill more space." I'm going to show you in a minute why you will look absolutely ridiculous in college if you do that. You also, regardless of what teachers may have told you in junior high or high school, you do not use quotes to make a point that you are incapable of making. You are a smart person. You have made it this far in your education um, by having your own thoughts. You can say whatever you want to say. You just need to have some type of support to back it up sometimes. So you can make any point you want so long as you've got good backing for it. So you don't need somebody else to make your point for you. You're fully capable of doing it on your own. So why we should use quoting. You need to show how your opinion fits into a larger discussion or how other people have either gotten something right and or wrong. So think about quoting as a conversation at a coffee shop. When you're sitting around the table with other people at a coffee shop, maybe you're listening to your friends talk, and one friend has made one comment, another friend has made another, and you said, "You know what? I don't really agree with what it is y'all are saying. Is that I understand that you believe this for this reason, and that you over here believe this for this reason. Um, I've got a completely different opinion of that." Or maybe, as I've listened to both of you talk, you're both concentrating on this one side of the issue, and you've never even looked at maybe why you ought to be considering it from this other side. So you use quotes to engage in conversation with other people to show that they've either gotten something right or wrong, or at the very least, how your opinion fits in with what it is that has been discussed. Sometimes it helps to make your point clearer to use a quote. So, the same as if you're sitting around a coffee shop having a conversation, maybe you say something and one of your friends says, "That's interesting you say that because that's kind of like the same thing that happened to my sister a couple of weeks ago. She did this and did that." And as that person explains, then you say, "Yes, that's exactly right. That totally clarifies exactly what it is I believe." So you've used that other person's comments to clarify what it is you already said. Sometimes it helps to validate your point. So if you make a comment, one of your friends might say around that coffee shop, "Hey, it's interesting. They just came out with a study that showed exactly what you're talking about because the study showed blah, blah, blah." And you say, you see, it's not just me that says this. There's actually some evidence out there to support what it is I believe. So you use that quote to either clarify or to validate the point that you have already made, not to make the point for you, but to clarify it or to validate it. So that's the reason we should use quoting. Um, all right, so before we get any further with how to quote and when we should quote, I want to draw a distinction between quoting and paraphrasing and let you know these two are not essentially the same. So, regardless of what the book says in some places or what you may have heard in other classes, you really should quote instead of paraphrasing. And let me tell you why you should avoid paraphrasing. Or actually, before that, let me tell you what paraphrasing is so that you don't have to look this up. When you paraphrase someone's words, you are not quoting them exactly, but you are rephrasing what that person has said into your own words. So you're basically taking someone else's comments and saying them the way that you would say them. Now, if this sounds a little bit problematic just the way I described it, it's because it is. Because one of the problems with paraphrasing is if I reword somebody else's words into my own words, it assumes that I completely understand the argument that that person is making. And if I don't understand it, for any reason whatsoever, then the way I rephrase that person's words is going to come out different than the way that person meant it to be. So it's dangerous for that reason. It's also dangerous because, as 2 and 3 suggest, um, if we really want somebody to say something else, then sometimes we may be inclined to skew their words to fit what it is we want them to say. And sometimes this is intentional, and sometimes it's not intentional. But everybody has had the situation sometimes of either hearing someone else or hearing ourselves rephrase what somebody else has said. And then somebody basically saying, that's not what I said at all. I was saying the exact opposite of that. But because we want so badly to hear somebody say something, then we change their words. But the biggest reason why that we should avoid this is every single paraphrase is an interpretation. No two words have the same meaning. Meaning, I can say that you are upset, I can say that you are distraught. And those two words, even though they may be similar, one has a completely different meaning than the other. So if you say, man, he was really mad at me the other night, and I say, yeah, he was livid. Livid is completely different than mad. So even though it might be a paraphrase, it does change the meaning, if only just slightly. So we want to be fair to people. If somebody has said something, let that person speak for him or herself. And then afterwards, as we're going to learn, explain what you think about what that person has said. So let me show you some examples of bad paraphrasing. Here is an example from online of what somebody has paraphrased the 13th Amendment to the Constitution as saying. Or I'm sorry, the Second Amendment to the Constitution. The Second Amendment to the Constitution clearly says all Americans shouldn't have any regulation on the guns they want to purchase. So obviously, if you read this, you can kind of tell this person is pro-gun. This person wants us to have guns in America. Listen to this other person's paraphrase of the Second Amendment. But the Second Amendment to the Constitution doesn't really say Americans have any rights as far as weapons are concerned. Okay, so obviously this person, as they are paraphrasing the Second Amendment to the Constitution, is clearly anti-gun. Here is the actual Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Quite possibly one of the worst sentences ever written in the English language as far as structurally. It's very confusing. But notice that this person up here says there shouldn't be any regulation on the guns they want to purchase. Notice it does not have anything to do, there's nothing that is stated about the regulation of guns in the Second Amendment. It does talk about a well-regulated militia, which this person does not mention at all. So this is not really a fair paraphrase because he or she has left out a very important piece of this. It is the piece that starts the Second Amendment of the Constitution, and it is not mentioned up here. This person also talks about guns. Where does it mention guns in the Second Amendment of the Constitution? There is no mentioning of guns at all. This is this person's paraphrase rewording of the Second Amendment. It says to keep and bear arms. What is arms? Well, it could just be the arms on your body. So congratulations, you have a right to keep your arms on your body. But assuming it doesn't mean that and it means weapons, then are guns the only type of weapons? It says arms in general, any type of weapons, presumably. So this person's not being fair because they're talking about guns and purchasing of guns. Where does it say anything about the purchasing of guns in here? It simply says, and I can rearrange this, and even doing so maybe changes the meaning, but to make it clear, because a well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state, you shouldn't infringe on the right of the people to keep and bear arms. There's no mentioning of the well-regulated militia. What is a well-regulated militia? Do we have one of those? Anybody a member of a well-regulated militia? It's an old concept that hasn't existed in America for quite some time, but essentially the militia was like the volunteer fire department where every single person in the country, or at least a large majority of the men, were members of a well-regulated militia, meaning they practiced occasionally, they understood what their jobs were, and then they were able to do them. Those people should be required to have and keep arms because we need to have this well-regulated militia. So if somebody comes to attack our country, we've got people that can take over. But nothing about well-regulated militia up here. So that's problematic. But look at the second person's comments. The Second Amendment to the Constitution doesn't really say Americans have any rights as far as weapons are concerned. Well, it does say, it says it's the right of the people to keep and bear arms, whatever that means right there. But this person, because of the anti-gun stance, is not being fair to the Second Amendment either. So what we have to do is let the Second Amendment speak for itself, and then afterwards we can explain what it is we think this means, why we think it's important. We can explain why this well-regulated militia is maybe important or not important anymore. We can explain what this person means by arms, because obviously there are weapons that have regulation in the United States. You can't own an M1 Abrams tank for home security. You can't have surface-to-air missiles to protect your yard from outside forces. There are certain weapons that have regulations, so there's all kinds of issues with what these people have done up here. They're not being fair to this. Okay, so before we get into what it is that you need to be doing for quoting, let me show you why it's important to quote only as much as you need. Ralph Waldo Emerson certainly shows nonconformity in manhood or length when he says, "Whoso would be a man must be a nonconformist. He who would gather immortal palms must not be hindered by the name of goodness, but must explore if it be goodness. Nothing is at last sacred but the integrity of your own mind. Absolve you to yourself, and you shall have the suffrage of the world." Okay, now if you're honest with yourself, as I was reading that, and I said, okay, what did you do as I read that? You would probably say, zoned out, or I stopped listening, or I just wasn't paying attention. And the reason is, there is way too much quoted, and none of it seems to make any sense at all. We as readers cannot digest that much information that quickly. So how much of this quote is needed? Ralph Waldo Emerson certainly shows nonconformity in manhood or length when he says, "Whoso would be a man must be a nonconformist." That's it. He's showing that nonconformity in manhood or length when he says this right here. That is all you need. But don't think I don't know that in your mind you're saying, well, holy crud, how am I supposed to fill 4 or 5 pages when I'm only supposed to quote that much? Well, I am glad that you asked that question hypothetically in your mind. So let me see if I can help you out with this. There is a formula to writing quotes, just like there is a formula to writing papers, just like there are formulas within math. And so I'm going to show you one that will work almost 99.9% of the time when you have to quote someone. The first thing you need to do before you even quote the quote is you need to introduce it. And by introducing the quote, I mean that you provide, number one, who is saying what it is that is being said. I need to know who's saying it. And number two, what is the context of the quote? So if I just came into class one day and said to an entire class of people, quote, "The red ones are better than the green ones," you would have no idea what I'm talking about. You'd say, what is he talking about? Red ones and green ones? And well, who is he quoting? But notice, it doesn't do me any good if I just say, John Smith once said, quote, "The red ones are better than the green ones." You go, okay, well, I understand who said it, but why in the world would somebody say that? What is that in reference to? So when you introduce a quote, you need to provide people with the context. So if my context is, for that quote, it could sound something like this. Some people believe that the color of food affects its flavor. John Smith, in his argument about M&Ms, argues just this when he says, quote, "The red ones are better than the green ones." Notice, now I understand what the green ones and red ones are and why in the world this guy's even talking about it, because he's talking about the flavors of food. So you introduce the quote, then you quote only as much as you need, but then after that quote, it is imperative that you explain what in the world that quote means, why it's important, why it's relevant to your paper, and most importantly, if it's not abundantly clear, how does that quote back up the topic sentence at the beginning of the paragraph where that quote is found? So let me show you some examples here. This is actually from a paper like the one you'll be writing in the 101 class. The song goes on to say, "She's never there." Okay, this was an original quote that was in a workshop that we did. Now, if you just put the song goes on to say she's never there, notice I don't know who she is. I have no idea where there is. So it doesn't make any sense. Listen to the difference. In addition to his girlfriend cheating on him, the songwriter lets us know his girlfriend is always out of the house by claiming, quote, she's never there. So this person has clearly let me know who the she is, the girlfriend, where the there is. It's the house. She's never there. The girlfriend's never at home. It's interesting that he says never. So notice this person in this explanation is going to point out this one word here that is interesting about this quote. After all, for a relationship to work, the couple would at least need to spend a little time together. So this person, even though this is short because I had to fit it on the screen, this person is trying to help us to understand why this particular quote is important, what it is that is interesting about this quote. She's never there. Hey, look, if you want a relationship to work and your girlfriend's never at home, not she's sometimes at home, not she's oftentimes out of the house, she's never there. You better hit Match.com because it ain't going to work. So that helps us to understand that quote. Let's look at another one. Then they say bed of roses in the song. This shows happiness. So notice, this doesn't make any sense. Why would somebody say bed of roses? If somebody just walked up to you on the street and said, bed of roses, you would have no idea what that person is talking about. At least the person was trying to explain it afterwards. This shows happiness. It just doesn't make any sense. Listen to the rewrite difference. This song also helps us to see how the suicidal woman feels about her imagined death. Essentially, this woman sees her death not as horrific, but as a bed of roses. So we understand this woman's talking about killing herself and how wonderful her death is going to be. It's going to be like a bed of roses. Listen to what this person does to explain this quote. Of course, while the bed of roses might be beautiful, which is what the suicidal person believes her death will be, the bed is also full of thorns. Although hidden underneath the beautiful flowers, they still imply a negativity that this woman simply doesn't seem to recognize. So this is pretty clever. This person says this woman thinks her death is going to be like a bed of roses, but she's not seeing a bed of roses that clearly because bed of roses is beautiful, but it also has a lot of thorns. And interestingly enough, this person went on to explain what those thorns are. There's this negativity this woman can't see, and it's all the people that she's going to be hurting by killing herself. So three little words here, because of the introduction, because of the explanation that went all the way down probably past here, that's what this person was able to get out of those three words. So if you introduce and you explain every single quote, you will notice that your paper will start to get longer and longer, but not just a bunch of fluff, not just a bunch of quoted material, but real content. The explanation part of the paper or part of the quote is the you. That is the you in your paper. And so if you don't have you in your paper, it's not really your paper. It's just a bunch of quotes strung together. So that's the reason we put that explanation in there. I'm going to skip through this one right here, but I will put the PowerPoint online so that you can access it if you want to look at a few more examples. A couple of refreshers from They Say, I Say. Number one, if you're going to disagree with what somebody is saying, say the songwriter says something, you can say, I completely and utterly disagree with this, but let me explain why. It's not enough to disagree. You got to let readers know why you disagree, because some people may read a quote and say, I don't see what the problem is with that. If you're agreeing, don't just say, I agree with that. You need to also let somebody know why you agree. What is it that is awesome about what that person has said? Why has what that person said, is it brilliant? And you can even carry it further than what that person said because you think it's important enough. If you agree and disagree at the same time, show the part that you agree with, but then say, hey, but you know, when this person gets to this point right here, I can't follow him or her that far. That's just it's awful. So let the person know what you agree with, but then as soon as you draw that line, let them know where you disagree with that person as well. Here's a exercise that I do in my face-to-face classes. I actually have the group of people or students get together, and I give them this quote: "There's no point outlawing guns because criminals don't obey laws." And I have them look in the They Say, I Say book and introduce and explain this quote using the templates from They Say, I Say. So within They Say, I Say, at the very back of the book and within the chapters, there is a section that is the templates. And I've actually put those templates online for you as well. Let me show you what this sounds like when you introduce and explain a quote using the templates from They Say, I Say. Here's an example from my spring 2014 101 class. There's no point outlawing guns because criminals don't obey laws. The underlined parts here, or the green is the introduction. The underlined parts are templates from They Say, I Say. In his discussion about the recently proposed gun legislation, John Smith claims that there's no point outlawing guns because criminals don't obey the laws. Okay, nice introduction. I know who's saying it. I know what this person's been discussing. Although I agree with Smith to a point, I cannot accept his overall conclusion that we should dictate our laws around criminals' actions and their lack of understanding or abiding by said laws. To me, that would be the same as legalizing crack cocaine because people are going to do it anyway. Another example that shows the possible absurdity of his viewpoint would be taking down all stop signs because not all people stop for them now. So this is pretty clever. What these people have done by using these templates, which is the underlined portion, is they've been able to point out what they dislike about Smith's argument. And this is pretty clever because what they're basically saying is, why are we basing our laws around what criminals do or don't do? It doesn't make any sense. Hey, we should stop, make murder legal because, I mean, people are going to murder one another anyway. We should just go ahead and legalize rape because, I mean, people are going to rape any people regardless of whether there's a law against it or not. These people are saying that's probably not the best way to base laws around what criminals are going to do. And there's other possible strengths and or weaknesses to this particular quote, but this is the way these people chose to use those templates. So please look through those templates because they can help you out tremendously. Remember, as you are citing your quotes in your paper, that if you refer to someone in the sentence, you do not have to use that person's name again in the parenthetical. So because I mentioned Emerson in the sentence, I do not put his name in the parentheses. As I stated in the MLA videos, in Self-Reliance, Emerson claims, because I mentioned Emerson here, I don't need him in the parentheses. Because I say one philosopher here, I don't mention Emerson's name in the sentence. I have to put him in the parentheses. So again, I will put this online if you want to refresh yourself on that, but probably the best place to go is the MLA videos. So hopefully this helps you out with quoting and it gives you some idea about what you can start to do now with your outlines for the research paper. Up until this point, we have not covered how to do research. So if you are starting to plan your paper for that research paper, don't worry about the research at this point. That will come. The only thing that you need to be doing is you need to be deciding on the song that you want to use and start breaking that song up into the different elements the song is helping us to understand and finding the quotes and hopefully in your mind or on paper starting to then explain those quotes so that people can understand what it is that artist is saying. So let me know if you got questions, and if not, then I will look forward to seeing your responses and other writings online. From this point forward, if I ask you to comment on something online, I want to see the introductions and I'd like to see the explanations to the quotes. All right. I will see, or hopefully start to see some of these song ideas rolling in here shortly.